I'm Bill Simmons, Artistic Director of the Phoenix Theater Cultural Center in downtown Indianapolis. And on this beautiful day in October, I am talking with Lou Harry, one of our city's esteemed critics, a beautiful journalist, a playwright, an all-around good egg. We're starting to lay the groundwork to work with a friend of mine who is the artistic director and is of color. She also specializes in devised work, about teaching for the Phoenix a group of artists to learn how to devise work. What is the process for devising work? You know, getting people in the room together. How do you create an atmosphere that is decolonized, that it isn't hierarchy, that it isn't, you know, somebody sets the rules and we all follow them, that we all contribute to the rules. We all talk about what could be developed. Somebody has to take all those ideas and start, you know, formulating it, whatever, but that it's a process of over a year to 2 years of building and devised work, that it's not just a weekend and on the following weekend we put the show up and whatever we've got, we're charging $30 a ticket. Yeah. That's a learning process for a lot of people, and we're going to make that class available sometime this winter to anybody who wants to. You know, we are paying her, and we do need to cover those expenses. But I would like to open up that class to whatever number she feels is, you know, possible. But she's teaching it for DePaul in Chicago, or I'm sorry, not DePaul, Dramatists in Chicago, and it's been like basically crazy popular.
Yeah, and that could be a tough jump for some playwrights. I mean, we've been sort of indoctrinated in some ways into the idea that the artistic vision comes from one head.
Yes.
Now, we also in Indianapolis have a very strong improv community that understands the opposite of that, or the other side of that, that the yes and idea where one person builds on what somebody else said and they create something that neither individual could have done. The workshop process is somewhere kind of in between of that. It requires the playwright, I'm not talking about for devised work, but generally workshopping a play. You know, the playwright brings something into the mix.
Yes.
That is maybe not fully formed, and explores it thanks to the insight and talents of actors and maybe a dramaturg and maybe a director, who else is it, or other people in the room, explores it, doesn't necessarily take, you know, the do this, and it'll work notes, but takes where the trouble spots are, where there's confusion, where things could be richer, and goes back and dives back into the work without the ego. You know, I've been to enough readings where, at least of playwrights, there seems to be two. There seems to be one, to be ideally the kind where a playwright is looking for signposts. They're looking for, how can I make this better? What works, what doesn't work? Where is it still not there? And that takes a leap for a playwright sometimes to acknowledge that the work isn't there and still put it out, even if it's in front of 5 people or 5 people reading it. On the other hand, I've been in readings where the playwright just wants to be celebrated. The playwright wants to be told that it's done and ready and good. Tell me it's great.
Yes, I did a reading at the Goodman for Bob Falls, and I thought this play is not done, and this playwright's not going to hear Bob Falls, and I left, and I heard they had quite a throwdown after I left, and after it was a couple of days later, I checked in with the playwright. I said Bob Falls seemed to like it, and the playwright was like, he liked you, and I'm like, this play's good at the Goodman, but it was the latter description, which was the playwright wanted to be told, this is fabulous. We're scheduling. And I was like, there's a nugget in here, but it needs to be workshopped because it's awfully angry, and you're an older white man of privilege, and you don't really get entitled to that kind of vengefulness. Anyway, it was you're exactly. There's the playwrights who are open to, I understand. I now hand my baby over to you to help me grow the baby a little bit. And there's the people like, look at my baby, tell me how beautiful my baby is, and that's really tough. That's a very tough.
You want to listen to the nanny and listen to the babysitter, but you don't want but the babysitter or the nanny isn't the parent. It's kind of a bad analogy there, but
no, and I'll also say I can tell when a play stops working if I zone out or whatever, and that's why we hire the services of dramaturgs. We've been using Sarah Slide in Chicago, who's a wonderful dramaturg, because she's really great with, when we were developing Tom Horan's The Pill a few seasons ago, Tom Horan had this couple of scenes, then we did a weekend workshop where we brought in Meisner trained actors, Tom said, hey, I'm kind of interested in this scene. And so I gave them scenarios and they improvised it. Tom recorded it. And there were bits and pieces of dialogue from those workshops that showed up in the finished script. But what Tom did then was he fleshed out more of it. So we had a script that was about 70% done, and we brought in Sarah Slide. And so she and I talked, and I'm like, this is where it stops working for me. She's like, that's exactly right. But then she would tell me the diagnosis. She said, well, he's already said that. And I think the climax is in the wrong place. And she said, I'm still not sure what the climax is. And she goes, I'm not sure Tom is. And so I empowered her to say, I'm like, Sarah, I agree with all of that. You talk to Tom, because I paid. And anyway, it was a lovely process. And then we workshopped it one more time about 6 weeks out from going into rehearsals. And that script that we finished, that script was ready to go. And we sat down to rehearse in, I don't know, May of 2018 or late April. And, but that I think that's, in my experience with workshopping plays up at the Purple Rose and other places, it's this idea that, like, who needs a dramaturg? And I'm like, yeah, if you don't have that training, you need a dramaturg, because you can't, it's just like cutting corners anywhere. It's like, what makes you think you have that skill set? Just because you're the person who gets to decide what goes in the season doesn't mean you have the skill set to say this play is ready and that play is not, because it's like few plays ready to go right out of the gate.
Right. Some may have that overlapping skill and some might not.
Yes,
it's like there are directors who are actors and there are directors who would never set foot on stage. That doesn't make one.
Kazan, when I read the John Lahr biography of Tennessee Williams, they look like Elia Kazan and Tennessee Williams, where Elia Kazan would say, yeah, that scene's not working, right? And Tennessee would rewrite them. And then when he lost that, I also think that was, there was a lot going on in Tennessee Williams' career in the 1960s, but losing that relationship, because I think Elia Kazan seemed to have that skill set to say, this scene doesn't work. And Tennessee's like, okay, and
Now, sometimes the opposite can happen. I was in a rehearsal room once early in rehearsals of a play of mine, and, the actors were working on it with the director, and it wasn't working. And I said to the director, okay, let me just do a little rewrite. He said, stop. Let us work on it.
Yeah.
Let us find it. Because my instinct as a writer was, I'm seeing it not working. Let me change things.
Oh, yeah.
And immediately. And his was, let us work on it. Figure it out. If after we do the work, if something's still missing, let's deal with you as a playwright. But for now, let us do the work. And so sometimes I think a playwright can look for those quicker fixes than understanding that, to me, the play is like the architectural plans of a building. It's up to the actors and the director and the designers to build that building from it. Some plays, switching hats, with the American Theater Critics Association, I chair the New Play Committee. We give out the Steinberg Awards, $40,000 in new play awards every year, and the Osborn Awards, which is for, I hate the word emerging playwright, but for a playwright who doesn't quite have national recognition yet. So 2 separate awards programs. So we're reading tons of plays every year that have been professionally produced around the country.
Right.
One of the challenges of that is that some plays read very well.
Yes.
They read smoothly.
Yes.
They go down easy. Some plays don't, but that's not always an indication of how they're going to play on stage. Right. I remember reading one play that had about 16 characters in it. That's a difficult play to track when you're reading it on paper.
Yes.
You have to approach it in a different way to appreciate what it can be on stage. So it's, yes, it's wonderful to read a good play, but that doesn't automatically make it a play that, rises above others, deciding sort of where that quality is. So my mantra is usually trying to leave room for the actors.
Yeah.
And make sure that the play allows for them to bring that other piece to it. Because if the play dictates so clearly exactly what's going to happen, I know some playwrights work this way, and more power to them. But I would rather have that question hovering and know that somebody's going to bring something. I'm excited about that piece of it. I'm not in the you know, the stereotype of Alfred Hitchcock as a director was he's got it all mapped out, and basically you're just, you know,
Right.
populating it.
Yep.
I'm a little more Robert Altman in that, you know. I get excited by the combination of actors. So usually when I'm workshopping a play, whether through Zoom or gathering actors to read it, I tend not to use the same actors in subsequent readings. Sometimes I'll use one if somebody's really in mind, but I like to see, well, what happens if this, you know, if this actor is a more imposing presence than another? What happens if this actor is meeker than another? What happens if, you know, if the racial mix is different? What happens if, and what does that do to the play? Does the play sustain this, or does it raise different questions? How does the dynamic shift? I love that over my however many years of seeing theater, that's one of the things that's really interesting to me about seeing multiple productions of the same play. Usually we only get that opportunity with Shakespeare and a few others, where, you know, we maybe have seen, many of us have seen, you know, a dozen different As You Like It's, and that's kind of the kick, is not necessarily tracking the plot, although it's neat when you can still be surprised by a production that you've seen 12 versions of, but it's seeing what different people bring to the mix and what different mixes of people bring to the mix. I wish we had that opportunity with more plays, especially with more contemporary plays.
Yeah, I think it's tough in Indianapolis too, because you know, we have this reputation for, well, it's been done here and nobody's going to do it again, right? Or it comes back around in 10 years or 20 years, or Shakespeare, you know, that's everywhere all the time. But yeah, I kind of wish that August Osage County came back around again, because I was in a production of it, A Human Race in Dayton, and then did it for the Brian from the Seek at the Phoenix in 2012. And it was so interesting because by the end of both of those runs, they were playing to standing room only. And both those times, people were like, oh, who's coming to this? I go, oh, I think a lot of people are coming to this because they're going to see a lot of their own histories in these characters. And sure enough, when I was in Dayton, it was out at, we did it as a co-pro with Wright State University out at their, I think it's called the Festival Theaters. And they say it's like 500 and something. It was standing room only at the last performance. And then at the Phoenix main stage, it was the same thing. And I think people, that's one of those plays where a colleague of mine, where she's like, I don't think I like this play. I said, no, you just, when we get into rehearsals, it's an actor's dream, because so much of it's really 2- and 3-person scene work, except the, you know,
the dinner.
Right, the dinner scene, and then when everybody's leaving the house in the middle of the night. Yeah, and so I agree with you. I think plays, it's so interesting to see iterations of plays. Plays that I've loved and that haven't worked sometimes when I've seen productions, or plays where I'm like, oh, I see how that works. Paige Scott she and I have been talking about the production in Oklahoma, New York. Right. And I've just been reading the descriptions like, God, I wish I had seen that, because all these people who I really respect are like, oh my God, I saw that and I never understood the end, and now I do. It's like that white community, you know, cloak and curly sins. I'm like, oh, now I want to find a video of it. So,
on the other hand, there was I thought a pretty amazing production of it that sort of was the opposite extreme, down at Lincoln State Park at Lincoln Amphitheater years ago, you know, around the time when I first moved here. And what was neat about it is, because it was sort of a community-based production, you felt like a state was being created, because there were like 50 people in the cast, and there were woods in the background, and there was a full, you know, the Surrey was a full Surrey, and it was, I think, really, I mean, not that there were brilliant performances or that it was stuff, but in that environment, that play worked in really interesting ways. So
isn't that lovely?
You know, there's a play.
When I did Our Town of Purple Rose in Michigan, the director had the stage manager, when he was pointing to the different parts of town where the churches were, the Congregational Church, he would point to the one that was like, you know, 2 blocks up the street from the theater, right? And he would talk about, and it was like, oh, holy, this is like Grover's Corners is Chelsea, Michigan, right? And everybody came to see that show. We did Steam Mat.
I mean, and it can be done with fairly well-known shows. I mean, something like Godspell. I've seen Godspell set at a military compound. I've seen it set on the docks of a seaside town. I've seen it with older actors, so there was a different weight to it. I've seen it in the sort of traditional clownish kind of way.
Yeah.
There's something special to me about that, about obviously some work is very specific,
Yeah.
to time, place, setting, where it almost dictates what the set's going to be. But even
Yeah.
then, there's there's room to find ways to bring it alive in different ways. Again, most of our experiences with multiple productions like that are Shakespeare, just because that's the stuff that gets done more often and it's more familiar. Rare is a play like August Osage County that has at least made inroads, at least at the time, into penetrating the popular consciousness, where at least you've heard, the non-theater geek has actually heard of it. That was, if you think about the last 20 years on Broadway, how many straight plays without a celebrity in the cast, without that person name above the title, has actually had a multi-year run. There aren't many.
No,
there aren't many.
No.
And
Yep.
Unfortunately, Broadway is still what the public perceives as giving legitimacy to something. Somebody jokingly said, "Well, people can't name." Most people, if it were 50 years ago, and you asked, a wide swath of people to name a playwright, a living playwright, you would get Neil Simon, you'd get Arthur Miller, you'd get, Tennessee Williams, you'd get whoever. Now, I doubt if most people, including many, many people in the theater community, could name 3 living playwrights. It's just, it's not the center, it's not anchored in our culture anymore. And that's celebrated. Part of the challenge.
Yeah, I don't think they're celebrated. I mean, I can remember seeing Tennessee Williams on The Tonight Show when I was a kid,
Right.
Even knowing who the hell he was, but I'm like, well, he must be a deal because he's on Johnny Carson, right?
Right.
And I'm like, well, of course he's on Johnny Carson.
Yeah, now he'd have to play like word games with Ellen DeGeneres, and I don't think it's going to happen.
I have this feeling that as my kids get older, I don't know that Broadway is going to have that cachet, and I think it's going to be because theater communities like Indianapolis are going to be like, my dream is to start building devised work about stories from Indianapolis or things that resonate with audiences in Indianapolis. And the plays, unless Broadway starts diversifying more, I think it's going to be harder for us to be bringing those plays in from New York, because it's like, well, we need to be telling stories about our community, and that's not a story about our community. I'm not saying there isn't room for, August Osage County or God of Carnage or The Humans, but I think it may be one of those things where it's like, and I've seen that in the National New Play Network. I'm seeing a lot of colleagues in communities like San Francisco and Chicago and Portland, where it's like, I don't. My audience isn't interested in God of Carnage. No?
Right. Yeah, I think there's kind of a separation. There's tons of plays out there that reference other plays, that assume that you'd have a knowledge of Chekhov, or assume that you have a knowledge of Ibsen, or make those assumptions. And that I think, and again, there's room for some of that. There's room at different sizes for all kinds of different theater. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be that, but we shouldn't assume that, A Doll's House Part 2 without Laurie Metcalf in it is going to be popular at regional theaters around the country. Because while that was one of the most produced plays around the country, it was also one that, my understanding is, it tanked at a lot of theaters.
Yes.
So
regional theater. A lot of regional theaters.
Yeah, a lot of regional theaters. So I think that there's room for that kind of self-reflective theater. There's room for really out there stuff. Anne Bogart's company that unfortunately just announced that they're not going to be producing anymore. I mean, some of the more completely out there productions that blew my mind, I loved, but I wouldn't necessarily say to my neighbor, hey, you know what? You don't go to theater much, but you would dig this. It's definitely for a niche audience, and that's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of stories you sort of have to figure out who the audience is, who the potential audience is, and tap into stories that are going to light them in some way. My writing tends to be my playwriting at least, would tend to be about fairly ordinary people. I've almost never written about somebody who anyone outside of anyone but their parents would call exceptional. I don't know if I've ever written a character who has a master's degree. A lot of my writing is set in a small town in New Jersey, the small town in New Jersey where I grew up. I have no idea if there's ever going to be an audience for those plays. I have no idea. I mean, I hope that if exposed to it, audiences would connect to it. I hope it becomes meaningful for them. But we can't expect playwrights to be marketers.
No.
It's great if but we also can't expect most theater companies to be charitable organizations for playwrights. You know, we have to sort of understand what everyone is trying to do and needs to do in order to get by. I've never been mad at an editor, putting on my journalist hat. I've never been mad at an editor for turning down a pitch for a story of mine, because they know what their publication needs. I've never been mad at a book publisher for turning down a book idea of mine, because they know what they have the potential to sell. You know, at least they hope to, or they have more insight into it than I do. And so I would hope that, as an editor of a magazine, that anybody pitching me on freelance stories understands that I have a better idea perhaps than them of what we've done, what we can do, what fits into the mix, what will work in the publication that I'm editing. That's why I was hired to do my job. I think it's up to the playwrights, I hope, to put that aside. Some will think very commercially. Some will think very non-commercially. I want to see more plays where the playwright has created something unique, has created something that I haven't seen before, has created something that may be anchored in something that's familiar enough that there are doorways into it for me and for more people. I think that's sort of the playwright's task. You need to not, creating something, if I want to create something that's just for me, that's exclusively for me, then I could do that. Anyone can do that. I want to create something that is that, but has doorways for other people to get into it, to connect to it, to find themselves into it. And that is the ongoing challenge. That's what I want. That's what I want to see out there. I want to see, when I go to a play, I want to open my heart and mind to somebody else. I want to live through these other characters and their flaws and their. I'm not necessarily going to theater for a lecture. I'm not necessarily, I'm not going for, any other sort of rule I attach to it. I could say that I'm going to get into another character's heart and mind, and I'm going into, because I want to experience the world through them. Yes, but I also love batshit crazy theater, that is going to make me uncomfortable, or is going to open different kinds of doors for me, that's going to challenge me in different ways. I also like a good dumb musical once in a while.
So as we go forward, as we come out of this, which I think it's going to be a long haul into 2021
Sure.
before I think we're back inside at least professional theaters with the difficulty in union contracts. And that's directly, I'll be honest with everybody who ends up watching this, that is directly related to how safe the union thinks your particular community or state is when it comes to COVID-19 cases. And so for those of us in states that are maybe not quite as restrictive, and we're seeing cases on the rise as you and I are recording this, it's going to be really hard because the union ultimately has got to protect its membership. And then also morally, those of us who are producing, it's like, what makes me think I have the right to put anybody at risk?
Yeah.
Because we need to make a buck. And it's like, God, if that doesn't scream, if that just doesn't scream hypocrisy, it's like we're artists, but we're like, but we gotta do this because we gotta, you know, it's like, no, we don't. There are other options, and it could be not saying about the Phoenix, but it could be, well, we don't exist anymore because I'm not grinding people up, risking them because of, so until we feel like it's financially viable and it's morally correct, we're gonna continue to let other people be the canaries in the coal mine. Because
and I want to see what theaters come up with.
Yes.
In this interest, to engage that interest. I'm fascinated by, you know, one of the benefits in a weird way of this is, at least in the early months of this, I was able to watch free streaming productions of national theater, and not just Shakespeare. There was some really wild, I mean, Les Blanc, the Lorraine Hansberry play was presented, and, you know, stuff like Barbershop Chronicles and just really cool stuff was on my TV, shot from the stage in front of a live audience. All the Stratford Shakespeare stuff, but, you know, Cheek by Jowl productions, and there's tons of theater out there to now stream. It is not the same experience, I get that, but it's stuff that we wouldn't have necessarily thought about a year ago. If you leave this session with nothing else, go to thespie.com, thespie.com. You can click on free, and it's going to tell you all the streaming theater that you can see. That's out there. That's not my own website. I have nothing to do with it. I was actually originally blogging about all these live theater options, and then Thespie started doing it, and I was like, you guys know what you're doing. You know, there's, I hope that next week I'm going to be able to see the Sadler's Wells production of Some Like It Hip Hop, which I didn't even know about until, you know, finding it there. There's the stuff, then there's the next wave, which was the stuff that's being created using the medium. Look at Richard Nelson's Apple Family plays. I mean, the last three of them there were 3 or 4 of them done live at the Public Theater in New York, and 3 that have been done via Zoom, where the characters are in Zoom. It's about a Zoom meal between people who are separated. The plays are breathtakingly good and the best ensemble acting you're ever going to see in your life, probably, with Marianne Plunkett and J.O. Sanders. And they're staggeringly good. Sally Murphy's in there.
I love Sally Murphy.
For those, I mean, if you don't want to see, you know, people in their 50s trying to navigate their lives, you look at like the Party Hop that was just launched last week. That's with Beanie Feldstein and Ben Platt and younger actors. Not great, but it tries to use the medium in a creative new way. It's set, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's set 3 years from now when we're still in the pandemic and still isolated. And it's about a couple of college kids who basically meet regularly and go party hopping through Zoom. And the play jumps around between the parties that they're going to, and it uses the Zoom medium in a really creative way, because which characters are still on, how they're going into this other party, what's, you know, how, but under that is how we adapt to the circumstances we're in. How do you have a first date when you're only meeting somebody through Zoom?
Yes, how do we adapt? So that brings me to my last question, Lou, is what does Indianapolis's theater and performing arts community look like a year from now? So September, October of 2021, when the traditional theater season is beginning, what does the new landscape look like? And I know I'm asking you to gaze into your crystal ball or pull out your tarot cards or your runes, but what do you think, or what do you hope?
Here's what, okay, let's do the hope.
From now.
I hope we found a vaccine, that we have an administration that has paid some attention to what's happened to artists in this country. So there's been some support so that we still have artists who are able to work. So that's part of this fantasy, that we're still being hyper cautious with theaters, that the weather's still holding out, that we're able to do more outdoor stuff. We're able to do things that space things out. We're probably seeing smaller cast plays so that rehearsals can be done safer, even if there is a vaccine. We're probably seeing plays that have less physical connection and intimacy. I hope that we're also seeing smaller companies breaking the form completely. I mean, I've thought about this, but haven't had the bandwidth to write it. I want to see a play where, you know, 2 or 3 pods at a time, you know, groups of people who are already together, walk to one space where a single actor or 2 actors do a scene, and then they walk to another space, and then they walk to another space, and they walk through a play almost like some of the rides at Disney World, where you know, go in one room and then it leads you to another room, and then so an actor is doing the same piece, but they're part of a puzzle that people are walking through safely in order to experience. I think there's room for theatrical experiments like that, and I hope that some of the smaller companies and college groups and people who would normally do something for a fringe might do something like that, to explore, to sort of break the theatrical rules and do that. I think we're going to continue to see smaller cast, shorter pieces. But I don't know what the content's going to be. I going back to what we said early on, I don't know if the audience is going to say, enough of an audience, a sizable audience is going to say, shock me, surprise me, wake me up, slap me in the face with your production, change me. Are they going to say change me, or are they going to say reinforce me? And I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know whether it's, we want to see, you know, feel good, you know, stuff and familiar stuff. I don't know what's going to get them off the couch. And are we going, should we create, should theaters be thinking about a smaller audience? Should they be thinking of, I mean, it used to be that it was about creating a season for most regional theater companies, trying to get people to go to 6 productions or 8 productions. That's been whittled away over the years into more of the pick and choose. What do I want to see this weekend, rather than I'm planning out my whole year.
Right.
I still hope to be challenged and to be entertained and to be engaged and to be surprised by this medium that I love dearly. And I hope maybe one of those plays is one of mine.
Well, your Rita from Across the Way is a lovely play, and I think that's one of those plays that if I had 100 hours in a week to be developing plays and the financial wherewithal, that's one of those plays that's resonated with me. So I don't know, Lou, you and I may continue to talk about that. And I have an idea. I really do. It's not just a hope, but it's a feeling that when we come back to it, we're going to be so hungry for the group experience. But I know a lot of people don't want to be taking time to learn from this pause, but I think the universe is forcing us to tear down some old structures and build something new. And I think those new things, I actually don't think we're going to allow them to get very far if they're not going to be beneficial to us. And by that I mean, like, tearing things down and just rebuilding something similar. I'm like, no, because you're going to need either the financial backing or the backing of the energy of your constituents, or your, you know, it's going to be whatever we come back to. It's going to be one of those things where it's like, oh, there's going to be a group of us, but like, that's it. And I certainly haven't figured out yet, but I'm starting to feel the artists and the stakeholders and those people circling around what, you know, we're still going to be about producing scripts, because that's in my DNA, and that's why I teach acting. Is I think there's a need for structured stories from beginning to end. But these devised works that could be something different, not just dance and not just play and not just music, but it's an amalgam of something that still has a story arc. There's something there.
Oh yeah, you think about stuff like This Beautiful City. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
Piece. You know, there's room for really interesting stuff in that area, in the same way that there's still room for the play by the playwright.
Yeah. And I read the article, and I read Anne Bogart's, you know, quote to say, you know, this isn't about the pandemic. This is about something that was in the works. I have a feeling the pandemic probably, you know, sped up the process, but it's the fact that, you know, we did this for 30 years. And as Anne said, there's a lot of companies that took a lot of inspiration from our
Right.
work. And I think I remember the paper saying that years ago, that there was a little Anne Bogart because Rob Johansson had studied with City Company.
Right. And there's the work they do is exhausting.
Oh gosh,
They
yeah.
do such incredibly rigorous work. It's not like we're doing the gin game,
No.
you know, in our retirement. Nothing
No,
against the
we're
gin game.
doing games swinging from trapezes and
Right, right, right.
parties.
And when you're 35, it's a little easier to manage and commit to that than it is when you're 60.
I saw Ellen Laurie in the lead in the Noel Coward play Hay Fever down at
Okay.
theater, geez, 20 years ago, back when Rose Kleiman and I were working together. We used to have Wednesday matinee tickets, and we would be the youngest people in the audience. And at that time, you know, I was already like 35 or whatever. And I'm like,
Right.
really? But anyway, I kept seeing City Company's Hay Fever, and I'm like, what the heck? Because the house was really modern, and there was water, and there was AstroTurf, and
Right.
Ellen Terry, not Ellen Terry, Ellen Lauren made her entrance on these wobbly heels and this huge hat. And of course the audience erupted because every year Anne Bogart set a show with her company and with that audience. They adored that company.
Yeah.
But it was so well rehearsed, and that company knew each other inside and out.
Right. And
Not
to
only
rehearse it,
out,
to have a non-linear show known, I mean, Hay Fever obviously is a little more linear than a lot of it, than Bob Rauschenberg America and things like that.
right.
You know.
Yeah.
So, you know, now it's back to work on the play that I've been working on. What I don't necessarily want to see is 400 plays set during the pandemic. You know,
that is not in the National New Play Network right now. That is not that's exactly it. We're all like, we're in that play. We don't need to sell tickets to that play because our audience is in that play. This has been a delight. Do keep me engaged about this play you have in development, and just, you know, keep doing what you're doing, because it's gonna get better. We've still got a bit of a haul yet, but
yeah, I'm still getting called in for occasional, you know, I've been basically doing about a piece a month for Indianapolis Monthly, usually smaller stuff having to do with the arts, but you know, that's what it is. We don't have, you know, there aren't really markets in this town for anything more than that.
I know, it's so tough. It's so tough. But do take me up on that offer. If you can record something like that, it's just so much easier for me to work into my schedule, to be able to listen to my convenience and to be like, God, can I make sure I'm available for 2 or 2.5 hours in a particular time to watch it? So
yeah, and I look forward to a backyard reading.
Yeah, I think that could be lovely. We have a fireplace pit, boom. I mean, portable one, and my black lab mix. But it's plenty of space to socially distance, and we've had some political activity out there, some letter writing campaign stuff. My wife has organized with some friends, and but it's a great place. I was going to try to pivot my Meisner class out there, but I've got at least 3 of my students are in their 60s, and it's like, and one has got a pre-existing condition, and it's like, you know, and they were like, we'd rather not. And I thought, well, it's not really fair to have in person for part of the class and have everybody else on Zoom. And then it's just like, responsibly, it's like, if we don't have to, we just need to keep this work. We really do.
Great. Well, maybe, you know, I'll let you know the status of it as we get closer to November, and then we'll see if there's, you know, a time.
Yeah, and what's beautiful about my job is, for the most part, it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
Right.
Though it's 9 to 6, 9 to 8. Mondays are 9 to 9. There's an emergency with a fire truck in my neighborhood. But my weekends have some freedom in them to gather people in my backyard for something like that.
Great. Yeah, we haven't even talked about the Theater Critics Conference I'm organizing. We've got Flaherty and Ahrens. We've got Oscar Eustace. We've got Richard Wesley. I mean, we have an amazing lineup of people that we've scheduled for this conference.
Virtually?
Yeah, all virtual.
Well, you know, we're really, well, that is one thing that Bob Lehman, our marketing director, is really being proactive is helping get the word out about important things. And even if we are not directly tied to it, if the things we believe in. So we've been supporting various blood drives. We recently supported Glitz and Glamour, which is a not-for-profit fundraiser for breast cancer survivors. We've promoted the Arts Council Start with Art Luncheon, which is virtual. You know, we're really trying to be good community partners and stuff. So that feels like something that we would help you get the word out on.
That one's just for the theater critics.
Oh, okay.
Public one, yeah.
Right. Because this year's National New Play Network annual showcase is virtual, starting in November, and I was like, well, we should just make that available to the world, I think, but maybe it's because members only, I don't know. But it feels like an opportunity where you could get producers outside of the network to, you know, let the member theaters have first right of refusal on some of these scripts, but there's some that don't get picked up at Showcase by enough theaters, and it's like, well, why not just get them out into the world right away if the network is going to pass on them? So, anyway, we'll see. That's in November.
Yeah, that's pipe dream is to get a play in that world at some point.
Oh, well, let's take a look at this one you have in development. I think Reader Across the Way actually has got some legs, but I'm really interested in this because I think healing. Yes. I think different journeys that end with healing. Yeah. And they don't need to be nicely sewn up. I think August Osage County ends with healing. I think Barbara realizing she's becoming her mother is one of the most powerful moments on the American stage in the last 20 years, which is I'm in my jammies, I'm taking pills, and I'm here with my mother with her keeper, and everybody else has left us. I have to go. You know, I think that's incredibly empowering at the end of that play. And I love Diane Conrad when I did it, and I did it with Christy Berger and Dayton. And each time those women left, I actually would watch those last scenes in the wings, and I'd be like, that's right, Barbara, run.
Which didn't work in the movie at all.
Oh, no. No. And we won't even get into that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've been working on this play for about 3 years now. And it's interesting how feels like it's becoming more relevant. Yeah. You know.
All right, friend. Well, this was lovely. I think this recording took.
Okay.
So should be appearing. I'm going to have Bob expedite it. So maybe in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'd like to get it in before the end of the month.
Great. Slice and dice it. Be well.
Bye. Bye.